Welcome back to a special live edition of On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. CJ is located inside his domicile. I'm down on the UT campus outside of Belmont Hall. Just wrapped up a press conference with Texas coach Steve Sarkisian. We'll be here for a little bit. Go ahead and get your questions in if you got them. Super Chat's jumped in front of the line as always. CJ, I think it's key to run down. We were talking about it. We were both at the press conference today, and we were talking about it beforehand. Sark wanted to correct himself on a few things that he said he misspoke on immediately after the scrimmage, which I think reinforces why coaches don't like talking immediately after scrimmage, because there was apparently a lot he needed to correct.
Yeah, there was. There was a lot that we reported even that maybe we needed to correct as well. So let's do that first. Of course, we reported that, or I guess Sarkeesian mentioned that it was KJ Lacey that was running with the first teams towards the back end of the scrimmage in the 2-minute drill to get the team into field goal situation. That was actually Matthew Caldwell, and that makes a lot more sense. Of course, Sark talking about getting Owens and Caldwell reps with that first team. Well, it was Matthew Caldwell that put that team in the position to put points on the board in a 2-minute situation. Hero Canoe was who blocked the field goal early in practice as well. Originally, Sark said it was Alex January, maybe a lot of hands up in the air, tough to tell who it was. After reviewing the tape, it was Hero Canoe. And we talked about only one turnover on Saturday coming out of that scrimmage. That was actually 2 turnovers. One, of course, the one that Sark mentioned was an exchanged handoff that was bobbled or not correctly exchanged between the center and the quarterback while under center. Well, we now know that Santana Wilson also picked off Trey Owens at some point during the scrimmage. So 3 updates there. Of course, what can you do when you hear it right from the head coach, right? But wanted to get that corrected and out of the way originally. Now on to some of the guys that Sarkeesian talked about today, Jeff, because there were plenty of them.
Yeah, I think before we do that, I think a couple of injury updates. Jelani McDonald and Trey Wisner back at practice today, so that's good. We're going to hold Trevor Gooseby out for a little bit longer. Sark said it's not serious, but they're being, I guess, overly cautious with Trevor Gooseby. And because just before anybody asked, we've already been asked about it over at OnTexasFootball.com, nothing on Emmett Mosley or Murad Watson.
Yeah.
So not saying anything good or bad, just nothing from Sark on either of those 2 guys. But McDonald and Weiss are back at practice. Gooseby not yet, but yes.
Hey,
CJ,
real quick, let me add on that offensive line because I got a text as we were leaving the facility, Jeff. Look, there's going to be some reshuffling on the offensive line on Saturday. It was Jaden Chapman who stepped in at left tackle. Right now, Texas is toying with getting their best 5 on the offensive line. Does that mean it's immediately a plug in place for Jaden Chapman? Perhaps not. Today, I was told that there's actually some movement with Cole Hudson moving to left guard, Nato Umeozulu moving out to left tackle, and Connor Robertson being implemented as the starting center. Texas is trying right now to see who their best 5 are, really their top 8, as we heard from Sarkeesian on Saturday. So while Trevor Gooseby is still nursing whatever the injury is right now, we don't believe it's too serious. Texas is trying to figure out what that starting 5 might look like without him.
I think that's key to him. 8's always the number I like to roll with, and I'm glad Sark mentioned that. I think Kyle Flood's even mentioned that in the past. That 8, if you feel like you got a starting 5 that you really like, you got somebody. Either maybe it's somebody in that first 5, or maybe it's somebody in that next 3 that's able to come in and play center, which I think Connor Robertson at this point is that guy. And you'd like to have somebody who's a true tackle, and then just kind of next available, somebody who's a swing guy that maybe they can play tackle or guard, maybe they snap a little bit, but basically kind of your next best available, and then a true tackle and somebody that does have the ability to snap the ball a little bit. But CJ, I think that dovetails nicely into guys that Sark said he's proud of, how far they've come in camp, because he mentioned one offensive lineman that we just haven't talked a ton about.
Yeah, we really haven't heard this name in quite a while, and it's Connor Stroh. He said, look, the work that he's put into change and really evolve physically is very important. And in the way that it's impressed Sarkeesian, he, of course, mentioned that he's been very proud of his work. But that's great to hear that, it's been a longer road for Connor Stroh, 1, physically, but 2, to get onto the field than, maybe he would have expected coming out of high school. But right now, to hear that from Sarkeesian, that, of course, is very encouraging in terms of what we might eventually see from Connor Stroh.
Yeah, and thank you to Matthew behind the scenes. We've actually got the cut from Sark right here, so let's hear from Sark on the guys that he's proud of based on what they've done during camp.
Stroh, I'm very proud of him, and he's put in a lot of work. He's changed his body. Guy I'm definitely proud of how far he's come. Spencer Shannon, Definitely proud of him, of his development. Jordan Washington, having been out all spring and coming back and where he's at. Parker Livingstone, can't say enough about what he's done, I think, on defense. Anthony Smith, I touched on him. I think of his development and growth. Alex January, from where he was a year ago to where he is today, very, very impressed with him. Wardell Mack, he's a guy who's finding his niche, finding his role, has grown into it. Kobe Black, another guy. So a lot of guys that way, and I think that's one of the hard things that we have to keep coaching to is like, we're going to recruit these 4 and 5-star guys. And there's a pretty good piece of humble pie they eat when they get here, because the guys all around them are 4 and 5 stars, and they're not the big fish in the small pond anymore at their high school. They come here, but they came here for a reason. They came here to get better. They came here to get pushed. They came here to compete. And the guys that can understand that and start tapping into that daily work, that daily grind, we live in a society of instant gratification. And this process, there's no instantaneous about it. Like, you have to put in work. And when you get on the other side of it, I think there'll come a time you guys will talk to all of them, but they're so grateful that they had to work for it, and that how much better they are today, not only as players, but as people. That's the part for me that's why it's easy for me to rattle those guys off, because I know the journey that a lot of those guys have been on.
Yeah, and obviously Sark started that clip talking about Connor Stroh, like we talked about just a minute ago. Again, we haven't heard a ton about Connor Stroh throughout camp, but CJ, he later added 2 guys to that list, and I'll let you have the floor on this one, because you asked the question. You asked about the backup safeties. He added Xavier Filsaime and Jordan Johnson-Rubell, and it sounds like those 2 guys, when we talk about core special teamers for this team, those 2 guys are probably at or near the top of the list.
Yeah, very much so. We all know about Derek Williams. We know about Michael Taff. Of course, Jelani McDonald has taken big steps as well. But who's behind him? I wanted to know that. So I asked Sark about Xavier Filsaime. We asked about Jordan Johnson-Rubell. He said, look, they probably should have been included on this proud list too, as Sark continued to go down the roster of guys that he wanted to get some shine there. But look, special teams, rotational usage on the defense as well. He said, look, for specifically Xavier Filsaime, I mean, he's taken a long push and look in the mirror when it comes to those steps that he's taken from a year ago when he first arrived as a true freshman to today. It certainly sounds like he's been one of the greater growths personally on and off the field that any Texas player has had over the last year or so. And of course, Jordan Johnson-Rubell, we've talked about him during his time at IMG, a very, smart high school football player. He was a captain. He was the vocal point of that IMG defense in the secondary. That's translated as well. But for right now, special teams and rotational usage in that secondary is where you're going to see a lot of guys earlier in that secondary, specifically for Xavier Filsaime and Jordan Johnson-Rubell. Jeff, we did also hear about Sark talking about maybe how many Texas players will see the field against Ohio State. Said anywhere in that mid-20s to upper 30s. Look, a year ago against Michigan, there's only 22 that saw the field early in that week 2 matchup, excuse me. But to hear that maybe expands to 25 or 30 is encouraging, considering the depth that we believe Texas has on that side of the ball.
Yeah, CJ, let's get to – actually, I want to get to a couple of headlines. First, I want to thank let's go ahead and get to a couple of headlines real quick, and then we'll thank our sponsor. Duck Camp is a sponsor of this live edition of Long Texas Football. CJ, a couple of headlines. One, Michael Taff, Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill named first-team preseason AP All-Americans. I don't think that surprises anybody. Julian Sand named the starting quarterback at Ohio State today. I also don't think that's a surprise, CJ. So any thoughts on either of those 2 things that popped up during the press conference today?
No, I mean, I think it highlights exactly what we believe have been the case for Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons, these guys coming into the season, Michael Taff, another. But Sark actually spoke a little bit about Julian Sand. Texas hosted Sand twice for camps in the summer during his recruitment. He said Texas wanted him pretty badly, but of course, we all saw how the dominoes fell. Once Texas landed the commitment from Arch Manning, well, Sand then looked elsewhere, ended up at Alabama before transferring up north to Ohio State. But he's very familiar with them. He knows a lot of his strengths, gets the ball out quickly. Good footwork, Jeff. It's all something that Texas will see August 30th after he was named the starter officially today by Ryan Day.
Yeah, it's fun to play these games. And look, I don't think anybody, myself included, would rather have anybody other than Arch Manning starting this game for Texas. But if Arch Manning had gone somewhere else, CJ, it's logical and possible that one of either Dylan Raiola or Julian Sam will be the starting quarterback for Texas in this game if Arch Manning isn't a Longhorn right now.
It's very likely that's the case. And it's funny how, the dominoes fall. I don't think any Texas fan in the world would trade the situation that they're in currently, however.
Now, let's go ahead and thank our sponsor for this live edition of On Texas Football. That's Duck Camp. Duck Camp makes gear for the folks who live for being out there, whether that's in a duck blind at sunrise or on the 40 acres for a Saturday kickoff. Born right here in Austin, Duck Camp builds best-in-class hunting and fishing apparel that works just as well for a full day in the field as it does for a long day of tailgating. From sun protection shirts to keep you cool during those early season scorches to their iconic game series hats that feel like instant classics, Duck Camp gear is ready for football season, hunting season, and every season in between. Get out there, stay out there, and hook 'em. Shop duckcamp.com today. And again, thanks to Duck Camp for their sponsorship of this edition of On Texas Football. CJ, let's go ahead and get to a couple of questions. Josh and Manning asked Jeff, was Sark's statement on the run game, quote, the tell that you talked about when Sark doesn't want to talk about something? CJ, let's just say that Sark's pretty pleased with where the run game is right now. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, he was pretty quick with his answer there. Of course, he was saying it feels good. At least it looks good. Talking about his run game, that was about as much as he expanded on that question. But we'll see. Of course, Texas is being tested in that front seven. If they're able to run on this front seven, Jeff, they should be able to run consistently on just about any other front seven that they'll face. Of course, it certainly helps when you have Cedric Baxter back in the lineup to run with this first-team offense. And by the sounds of things, both he and Trey Wisner are looking very good for that Texas offense.
Yeah, I mean, Texas, they're not full on, like just full bore into Ohio State prep. Sark even mentioned it again today that there's still some guys they've got to develop. And you know, you can run down the positions. I mean, they've got the young wide receivers. They've got the young offensive linemen. CJ, those young safeties you asked about, they've still got guys they need to develop. But when you start looking at the Ohio State game, I'm feeling a little bit different about this game just from this, not in terms of wins and losses, but just Texas' ability to control it because with camp, for all intents and purposes, over, I think if we were going to give out a camp MVP, it'd probably be C.J. Baxter.
I tend to agree. And again, just the way that he's ramped up his usage with this Texas offense, 12 days out to say that he's 100%, maybe not there yet, but I think he's pretty close, maybe 95 in that range where you certainly round it up if you're a teacher grading an exam, right? So it certainly sounds like C.J. Baxter is well ahead of schedule in terms of where I had him in the middle of the summer, as well as certainly what he's put on the tape already in fall camp, Jeff. He's going to be a big piece of this Texas offense when they head up to Columbus.
CJ, anything else stand out to you during the press conference today? I know Sark, it was a lot of, I don't want to say rehashing, but maybe clarifying a few things that happened on Saturday. Also looking ahead to Ohio State. I think for me, it was, the process of preparing for Matt Patricia. And, Sark said he's watching all kinds of different NFL tape. He's going back and watching Ohio State tape from last year because, like we've talked about here on the channel, the entire defensive staff is still the same. The coordinator is the only change that happened. So there's going to be some carryover. And Sark even said, look, there's going to have to be probably some in-game adjustments that are made, and that's going to be the cat and mouse game of trying to figure things out. So that chess match fascinates me. But, CJ, anything for you really that stood out that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, just building on that. He said he's watched tape from Matt Patricia at the Patriots, at the Lions. He's watched all of what Ohio State put on the field a year ago. Because to your point, he's really the only new face in that defensive room for the Buckeyes. But the big thing again, and I know Jerry's been big on this dating back to name a date since he's arrived on campus, but the more that we hear Sarkeesian talk about standouts and guys that, one, he's proud of, he mentioned that today, but two, guys that are just doing things the right way, this name continues to pop up, and it's Ty Anthony Smith. Today he was asked who were the best tacklers on his defense. First name out of his mouth, Ty Anthony Smith. He also added Jelani McDonald. He also added Anthony Hill, three guys that Texas is going to see quite a bit on the field this fall. But it certainly sounds like Ty Anthony Smith is going to be taking a huge jump from year one when he saw the field for about 100 snaps on the defensive side of the ball to what could be basically a borderline starting position for the Longhorns in 2025.
Yeah, Jerry, Bobby, and I did a video on linebackers on the channel over the weekend, so you guys can go check that out to get some more in-depth thoughts on the linebacker position. But you're right, CJ. I mean, I think there's a really good opportunity to get him some snaps early. Jerry mentioned this, and I agree with him 100%. You want to take some of the workload off of Anthony Hill early in the season if you can, just to make sure that he's as fresh as possible. And when you're playing 15, 16, 17 games in a season, which is what Texas is planning on doing. So I think there's a really good opportunity, CJ, for Ty Anthony Smith in non-conference play to really get his snap counts up. And then, once you've got – I mean, if they really feel like they've got 4 starting caliber linebackers, if that's truly the case, then by the time you get the SEC play, you can run out any number of combination of those 4. I apologize for the noise in the background, but, you can run out any combination of those 4.
Yeah, and again, that builds on what we've already talked about with the defensive line depth and really the way that Texas has continued to stack elite talent after elite talent. So that's encouraging, Jeff. We'll get out of here on this note because we'll have many more nuggets and bits of intel over at ontexasfootball.com later today. Again, great chance to become a subscriber today. OTFOG, go use the code for $39.95, 1 year of access. We've got it all covered for you, of course, with some nuggets from Ohio State and their QB battle, which was announced today. But all in all, Jeff, we're moving forward. We're not yet in game week, but we're getting pretty darn close. Week 0, we've made it. Close us out, Jeff, because we're about just as excited as anything else right now.
No doubt. Again, want to thank Duck Camp for their sponsorship of this live edition of On Texas Football. Like CJ said, get over to the website right now. If you're not a subscriber, use the promo code OTFOG when you do sign up. That'll get you 1 year of access for $39.95. Make sure you like this video and make sure you're subscribed to the On Texas Football YouTube channel. That way, whether it's here on the channel or on the site, you've got the latest news, notes, and nuggets coming out of the 40 acres as we get closer. 12 days now until number 1 Texas and number 3 Ohio State. For CJ, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for tuning into this live edition of On Texas Football. And until next time, welcome.